as best as you can.
We're live, so you can start.
Oh, I am live.
Yeah. Sorry.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Dad.
Are the mics on? Let me go turn that on.
One more minute. Mic one, testing. Excellent. Hi, everyone. My name is Pierce. I'm the director of the Transnational Literature Series here at Brookline Booksmith and your host for tonight's conversation. I want to open up this space by saying thank you for coming out tonight. The Booksmith has been around since 1961, and that's because we're a wonderful community. Your support means we can keep having events like this, so thank you again. As you may know, tonight's event is part of our ongoing Transnational Literature Series, which focuses on stories of migration, the intersection of politics and literature, and works in translation. If you enjoyed tonight's event, please check out our full events lineup online at brooklinebooksmith.com so you don't miss some of the amazing events we have coming up, both virtually and in store. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram for updates. Toward the end of the event, we leave about 15 minutes or so for an audience Q&A, followed by a signing. We have copies of tonight's featured book available over at the register. And please take a moment to silence your cell phones. I think that takes care of the business end of things. Now I'd love to tell you a little bit about our guests. Tonight I have the very great honor of introducing Adèle, Rosenfeld, Jeffrey Zuckerman, and Laird Hunt, here to discuss and celebrate the release of Jellyfish Have No Ears, a brilliant and deeply moving debut novel about language, connection, and the power of imagination. Adèle Rosenfeld lives in Paris, where she runs writing workshops. Her debut, Jellyfish Have No Ears, was a finalist for the 2023 Prix Goncourt for her first novel. Jeffrey Zuckerman is an award-winning translator of French writers, including Jean Genet, Hervé Guibert, and Amanda Davy. He lives in New York. And tonight's moderator, Laird Hunt, is the author of 9 novels, including the 2021 National Book Award finalist Zori, as well as most recently a collection of linked stories, Flow Up, Sing Down. A 2024 Guggenheim recipient in fiction, he is the winner of the Angsfield Wolf Book Award for Fiction and the American Literature Grand Prize, among others. His reviews and essays have been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Irish Times, and the Los Angeles Times. And his fiction and translations have appeared in many literary journals. He lives in Providence, where he teaches at Brown University. And last but certainly not least, thank you to our wonderful interpreters, Sana, Linda, and Amanda, who will be interpreting tonight's event for us. I'm so pleased to have them here together in conversation. And now Adèle, Jeffrey, and Laird.
Straight up with a bit of food to eat, and then the day you're going to treat out, so isn't really what
C'était le bâtiment Castaigne. Moi, j'avais entendu Castagne. Avant de franchir les portes à toutes bleu battant, comme dans les vieux westerns, il y avait cette petite pancarte qui indiquait auto-rhino-laryngologie, ORL, et chirurgie cervico-faciale, service d'implantologie. Seule auto-rhino-laryngologie m'était familier. Enfant, j'y voyais une sous-branche de l'étude des rhinocéros.
That would use the swing thinking and hope Western feet. There was a stars same thing, the incarnation. And it had no surgery in these services. Only the incarnation is coming with me. But I was bitten, but that was a severe very nice with studies.
Dans mes oreilles, des coups sourds battaient la mesure de mon pouls. J'ai pris place tout au bout du couloir, près d'une table couverte de magazines spécialisés dans la sourdité, l'un d'entre eux proposant des témoignages sur l'isolement au travail. Je levais les yeux à chaque ligne pour ne pas louper l'appel du rendez-vous, quand j'ai constaté qu'une vieille en fauteuil roulant s'était postée en face de moi, juste devant le magazine « 30 millions de sourds ». J'y ai lu une phrase placée en encadré sur la couverture. Le langage aussi peut être sécurisant, voire sécuritaire. On croit alléger la dureté des mots en les compliquant. Sourds, aveugles, vieillards, malades mentaux, on a honte de parler de vous. Des malentendants aux hospitalisés spéciaux, en passant par les non-voyants et les seniors, on va en arriver à parler des personnes mortes comme des non-vivants. Quand je me suis aperçue que la vieille, ou le senior, ou la personne âgée, je ne savais plus comment la nommer, me hurlait dessus, je l'ai interrompue. Vous savez, madame, je n'entends sûrement pas mieux que vous. Mais elle ne m'a pas comprise et a continué son monologue éraillé.
It may use with distance, it don't need a makers, it you can see it at the end of the hallway, next to a table covered with magazines about deafness. One of them offering up anecdotes about isolation in the workplace. 8 things to about each thing. Sort of written is spelling being called. It's our difficult old white woman in a wheelchair across the room. Wait, the magazine with the deck on the cover, text in the box read. Language can be reassuring or restrictive. People tend to think that complicated language softens them. They seem to say deaf, blind, old, has mental disorder. This is slippery slope from the point of hearing in critical cases by way of impaired senior citizen to the dead being called unliving. When it realized that the old woman was senior citizen or elderly person, whatever I wanted to call her, was shouting at me and interrupted me. I don't think I hear any better than you do. But she didn't understand and kept on with repeating round and back.
Un homme a mis fin au dialogue biaisé. C'est à nous. Je l'ai suivi dans la cabine capitonnée. Il a refermé la porte derrière moi. J'observais l'immense poignée en fer chromé et je n'ai pas pu m'empêcher de faire le parallèle avec les chambres froides des bouchers. Ici, on abattait le son, méticuleusement, par tranche. Il m'a installé le casque sur les oreilles délicatement, comme on mettrait des électrodes sur une tête de poule, et m'a confié le joystick. Les premiers sons me sont parvenus, pas tous. Certains pulsaient contre mon tympan.
I mean, put an end to the well-sected conversation. Could we please about him into the hat room? He shut the door behind me, gripping a huge chrome metal window that struck me inseminated the bridge's cold rooms, except I was being cleaned up. You meticulously space by thin space was sound. He said the headphones are released delicately as if he were basic electrodes on a chicken slide. It had to be acoustic. Bird sounds came but not all. Some universe echoes make me go.
Puis, c'était le tour des mots. Il s'agissait de répéter la liste comme un perroquet blessé. C'était souvent absurde, et il fallait lutter contre l'imagination qui s'engouffrait dans les interstices. Cheveux, citron, rocher, soldat, muguet, bouton, verrier, fourreau, bassin.
It was time for the wounds. I had to believe that this thing must have purity. Most of it was absurd, and I had to persist that my imagination filled in the gaps. Women, lemon, older, soldier, happy, burden, blacksmith, apron, soldier.
Thank you for that. Is this working? Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here to celebrate this beautiful novel in its beautiful English version. It's amazing work on both sides. Thank you both. And so here we are with a narrator who has a dilemma, right? Should she get a cochlear implant or not? There are pros and there are cons. This is what the novel is going to wrestle with. We plunge immediately into this uncertainty. We don't start slowly, it doesn't taper off, we're in the crucible. And the question is, for Adèle, how did you come to what I think was a wonderful decision to make it all during this period of intensity?
Je suis absolument fascinée par les moments décisifs, les instants décisifs, les moments où il s'agit de faire des choix.
I'm absolutely fascinated by decisive moments, moments where one has to make a choice.
Et donc, ça a été, et aussi les moments de grand trouble où il n'y a plus du tout de feuille de route, de façon de penser le monde. On est vraiment des moments d'abandon où il n'y a plus du tout toutes les choses qu'on avait imaginées qu'elles se passeraient explosent et on est dans une situation presque absurde de l'existence.
And also moments of complete disorientation where there's no map drawn out and all of the things that we thought might happen or could happen aren't going to happen, and we're completely left without a clear way forward.
Et comment les personnes vont réussir à mobiliser beaucoup de ressources en eux pour finalement faire des choix et avancer et dépasser une situation qui paraît inextricable.
And how people are going to be able to muster all the resources within them to eventually to make a choice and to overcome a situation that seems inextricable.
Thank you. Yeah, it's this question of not having a map, not having a way forward, is really interesting in the novel because Louise, the narrator, is going to, she deals with this intriguingly. Her mind deals with this intriguingly. And I'm thinking in particular about the eruption into her life of a certain dog, a certain soldier, a certain botanist, and other manifestations of this uncertainty. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that link between losing something slipping away, and these things that rush in to fill the absence.
L'idée, c'était vraiment, j'ai écrit ce livre avec l'idée de qu'est-ce qu'on gagne quand on perd. C'était une question très importante.
So the idea for me with this book was really the idea of what do we gain when we lose something. It was a very important question.
Donc la narratrice Louise, de plus en plus, quand elle sombre dans le silence, il y a effectivement un autre monde qui s'ouvre puisque les sens évoluent et donc elle a accès à autre chose.
So the narrator, Louise, as she slides further and further into silence, there's this other world that opens up because her senses evolve.
Thank you. And out of this evolution of other senses, of other very interesting characters in her life, there's an incredible resourcefulness around language. And on the back of the novel, the writer Anne Fademan observes that the novel turns out, unexpectedly perhaps, to be about sounds. And one of the greatest pleasures of reading the book was all of the resourcefulness around language, and I'll also invite Jeffrey to weigh in on this, because it was written really interestingly, and then it was translated really interestingly. And so I'm curious about that aspect of the novel. Was it important to you to render the language so interestingly, so intensely? Where does this linguistic palette come from?
J'ai vraiment écrit ce texte dans l'idée que la langue me manquait, puisque les sons disparaissaient, la langue se déformait. Le personnage de Louise vit avec le manque du langage.
So I really wrote this text with the idea that language was missing, in a sense, for me. There were words that were missing, or words that were getting distorted, and so for the narrator, Louise, that language, she is missing language.
Et ce manque du langage créait quelque chose où ça interroge toutes les facettes du langage, que ce soit au niveau du malentendu, par exemple, qui peut révéler tout ce que les mots peuvent avoir de sens différents. Un même mot est polymorphe à plusieurs sens, et donc on navigue dans toutes les possibilités du langage. Et donc c'est la traversée que fait Louise. Elle fait cette traversée.
So for Louise, in the sense that there was an absence or a feeling of missing language, what the text really interrogates is within all of the possibilities that this opens. So a misunderstanding can reveal senses that are meanings that are within. And so what does the absence of language as it is used in a standard way provide as possibilities within that silence?
Et c'est aussi comment les mots sont trompeurs, puisque parfois les sons et le sens correspondent, parfois ils ne correspondent pas.
And how words can also be deceiving, because sometimes the sound and the meaning do not correspond at all. Sometimes they do correspond, but sometimes they don't.
I think for me as a translator, I mean, usually when I'm translating a book, I want it to be so creative. I just didn't have to stick with what the text actually says. I think it is critically case. There were moments when it was so clear that language was difficult to pull away from reality. Like a painting of it. It was becoming mood in the most dangerous, fascinating way. It was so immediately related on my own personal experiences and this interesting to something and knowing that it could not have possibly heard it right. But there was no logical explanation or logical solution to what I should have heard. And about that, the sort of strange, serene thinking in use of the positive translation. There would not be moments when you would just suddenly have the narrator immersed in a very strange style of words. And instead of trying to replicate those words exactly, I had to think, what kind of appearing in a really bizarre situation is going to look at English. It is every single time I misunderstood something, so I just had to think of a mere logical phrase, mount it out now to myself, and then I could immediately see how I would understand it wrong. And that became the basis of whatever book with the English. It was really fun to come up with that. To see how crazy I could get.
I just want to give a couple of examples of
You got this.
Yeah. of moments in language that are quite beautiful, intense. I mean, after all, it started in terms of misunderstanding with just something as basic as castaña and castaña, right? Those two different sounds. So that's one level of things going on. But there are these just beautiful moments that Jeffrey has rendered. The texture of his voice was that of a rusty swing going back and forth. Some words went back down his throat with the sound of a crank pulley, while others increased in volume to reach my ear. Right, there's a resourcefulness around sounds and the description of sound that makes me think of the resourcefulness around describing wine, for example, right? It's really quite interesting and moving. And one more example, in a little different register, towards the end of the novel, I associated human beings with sandstorms. The city's streets had turned into a death valley, and I moved through it as a shield body against hot breaths and onslaughts of sound. Right? I mean, it's really rich and really tangible as language. And so just wanted to give a couple of examples to make sure that it was not too abstract. So I want to ask how to ask the autofiction question. And I'm going to be careful with this because autofiction, right, is very à la mode. We hear a lot about it. And most authors I know reject it. No, this is not autofiction. And that's fine, right? Nonetheless, the narrator, Louise, has some points in common with the author, Adèle. And I'm curious, not whether or not this is autofiction, but how important to you was it that there be a correspondence between your experience and the experiences of Louise in the novel?
C'était très important pour moi de parler d'une expérience sensible et sensitive que je connaissais. Mais pour pouvoir en parler, il fallait que j'en passe par la fiction.
So it was very important to me to speak about a sensory and sensible and sensitive experience that I lived, but I needed to pass through the means of fiction.
Il y a une phrase que j'aime beaucoup de Mario Vargas Llosa qui dit que en fait l'auteur fait un striptease à l'envers, c'est-à-dire
There's a phrase that I very much like by Mario Vargas Llosa, which says that an author does a striptease in the reverse.
et que l'auteur part de lui, mais il se revêt de différents vêtements et jusqu'au point où il ne se reconnaît pas toujours.
So the author starts with themselves, but then puts on different clothing one by one to the point of being unrecognizable, even to oneself for the author.
Thank you. And also, yeah, a very interesting metaphor for what it is that's happening. The author, American author Garth Greenwell, who has a book out now called Small Rain, has referred to he's writing experiences that are approximate to his own experience, and for him, the question is not interesting. It's certainly the raw material that he uses to build his fiction is partly his own experience, it's partly his imagination. And he would, I sense, like the question not to be asked anymore. And we'll definitely have time for questions from you shortly, but I'll ask a couple more. And also, Jeffrey, it would be great if you would weigh in as well on this one. So I thought often of Ovid and the Metamorphosis when I was reading your novel. Especially at a given moment when the botanist, this key figure, is transformed into a log near the end of the book. And whether or not you were thinking of Ovid, I'm curious about what books you were thinking of as you built your own book, as you wrote your own book, and transformed some of your experience and some things that were not onto the page. What were you reading? What are your influences? What are you in conversation with as a writer?
J'ai commencé par lire, enfin non, j'ai lu Gerasim Luka, et Gerasim Luka, justement, il part du bégaiement avec le bégaiement, il arrive à complètement renverser, à ouvrir des portes, puisque le sens se transforme avec le bégaiement. Donc, d'un défaut, il réussit à en faire quelque chose de créatif.
So I started by reading
Gerasim Luka.
Gerasim Luka. Gerasim Luka, who writes about stuttering and how through starting from this point of stuttering, one is able to transform something that could be considered a defect into a greater source of meaning.
Et donc j'ai voulu utiliser une contrainte similaire, c'est-à-dire donner à voir les trous du langage dans le texte, comme Gerasim Luka a pu représenter le bégaiement pour ouvrir la porte vers quelque chose de très créatif.
So I wanted to use a similar constraint. I wanted to make visible in my text the gaps in language, as Gerasim Luka had used stuttering to open a door to creativity.
C'est comme ça que dans le texte, j'ai utilisé des pendules. Il y a parfois des phrases où il y a entre parenthèses, comme un peu des didascalies de théâtre, des mouvements de lèvres qui remplacent les mots que la narratrice n'entend pas.
So that's how I, in the text, ended up using a hangman's game and moments where there are stage directions, movements of the lips that are indicating what the words that the narrator herself can't hear.
Donc ça, c'est pour le volet très poétique, et très physique de la langue. Mais ensuite, j'ai aussi beaucoup lu de littérature sud-américaine, de littérature argentine.
So that's to close it up on the sort of poetic and physical side of the language. But I also read a lot of South American authors.
I was aware that the book had been completed focus began event that was being part of the kidnapping damage to American region. He was being he was at the linkage between surrealism and the Brookline novels. We need to match the book. So in fact this way to do he was saying weird things one thing, but in a way that was extremely compelling to read. But again, that not en een community wordt in een community zijn. Het is niet dat we community is de beschrijven met anders over te liggen. Het about that to be really community metaphor as I talked about, but with editors, but we can put this very distinct ancient word that almost maps perfectly into our word, but not quite. It is in a word with very distinct language in different people in that I would say those words describe the book as I was up in the book and tasting it again. Ik vind het bij mezelf coming back more and more often. Ik weet, ik denk dus to different books about disability and not even fictional books, but books like an fictional book on stigma by Garden, which talks about the experience of people who have what it terms as spoiled identities, which is identity that has that not always been passed from the society. I talk about the different ways that people tend to mask or come to terms with those identities or distortions. And develop as a particular terms in order to be able to make the excellent English coherent in a way that would connect the English language readers. But the basic point, the not fun point is the book I was thinking about when I translated the book was this book. I can even go back to any decades and look at the pens and take them at their own terms, come about with spent roses, but is absolutely never a thought of as well with the woman turning up a tree and to figure out how to do something innovative with language. One of the characters to describe what's going on with the woman, she said she has a manatee, but you know French for manatee, it is in the main correction, it says no, it's a man idea trouble talking. And I'm like, how do I make this book in English? I ended up having a conversation with somebody explaining the victim incorrectly. This says something about psychiatry, and it was rated as psychiatry. So all of a sudden, I had this solution in English. The psychiatry, and now the body is true. So, the book will that possible.
Just a couple more questions from me, then we'll turn it over. So this book, I started by talking about the intensity of the situation, the dilemma that's faced. It's also funny. It's quite funny, this book, at moments. Moments of misunderstanding, but also a kind of cultural commentary about contemporary French society that doesn't always come off as the most wonderful place to be as a human being, like any society. But I'm curious about the humor in the novel and what role it's playing, and also the role of a kind of social commentary that bubbles up. There's almost a political element to the commentary that comes through the novel about the dilemma that Louise is facing and the obstacles that she's confronting.
On m'a demandé à un moment donné, quand j'écrivais ce texte, si je faisais un texte politique.
While I was writing this text, someone asked me if I was writing a political text.
Parce que au début du texte, c'est vrai que il y avait quelque chose de très... avec l'humour, j'essayais vraiment de faire grossir les traits d'un certain nombre de travers que peut poser la question du malentendu dans une société.
So when I started out at the beginning, there was one aspect of the humor that was trying to enlarge the numbers of obstacles that misunderstanding and not being able to hear can pose for someone in society.
Mais qui parfois peuvent même être un peu, on m'a dit, mais est-ce qu'il s'agit de montrer aux entendants, est-ce que c'est à charge contre les entendants?
And then I was asked, is this sort of, is it about showing hearing people what it's like? Is this against the hearing?
Et aussi contre le monde de l'entreprise.
And also against corporate culture.
Parce que dans le monde, dans l'entreprise, dans le livre, je me suis amusée à imaginer que, en fonction de la perte d'audition de la narratrice, on la déclasse dans des postes qui ne correspondent jamais à son profil et qui sont de plus en plus absurdes.
So as in the novel, I had a good time imagining in this bureaucratic world as a function of the decrease in Louise's ability to hear. She was brought down class by class to a lower grade to a point that had nothing to do with her profile or competencies to a point of absurdity.
Explain with a specific about absurdity that this got mentioned.
Et autour de l'absurde, c'est ce que je voulais montrer, c'est à quel point la narratrice cherche aussi à comprendre et que parfois, trop chercher à comprendre l'emmène aussi dans des endroits qui sont des impasses. Et à la fin du texte, il y a un moment donné où elle lâche l'affaire avec la compréhension du texte, avec la compréhension d'une discussion. Et c'est là qu'elle sent qu'en abandonnant l'idée même du sens, elle est prête à entrer dans une transformation.
So yes, on this idea of absurdity, I wanted to show these moments when Louise is trying so hard to understand and perhaps even trying too hard to understand, and it brings her to a dead end. And so toward the latter part of the book, there's a moment in which she is trying very hard to understand a discussion and then is able to sort of abandon this quest to understand, and that is what allows for the moment of transformation.
There's we haven't mentioned Kafka yet, but certainly in the route that Louise takes through these companies into these more and more absurd positions, there's definitely some Kafka in the mix, without question. We should turn it over to see if there are any questions from the audience.
Any questions?
Hello. As somebody who has, I guess, had kind of like a beginner level education with ASL in the deaf community, it's. Oh, just for a minute. Sorry. As somebody who's had kind of a beginner education with ASL in the deaf community, I've recently come across a lot of sort of like deaf positive stories and kind of like, people embracing their deafness and leaning more towards like, learning to sign and communicate via sign. And so maybe just because that was so fresh in my mind, I was almost surprised when I read this that maybe her decision doesn't follow that exact narrative. And I was, I guess, also her interaction with the deaf community is not necessarily a super positive one. She goes to class to learn, and she kind of gets rejected by the teacher in this specific way where she's trying to draw similarity, and that really weighs on her at a point when she's already kind of low. And so I guess I was just kind of interested in how you decided to include that angle, I guess, of somebody going through that process, if this is coherent, I'm sorry. Somebody going through like that process and that angle on somebody meeting the deaf community for the first time in a like, will I become part of this kind of way?
Il y a plusieurs aspects que je voulais représenter. Il y a l'aspect, effectivement, il y a quand même un aspect positif dans le texte autour de la communauté sourde, c'est que je décris la langue des signes comme je voulais vraiment faire entrer la langue des signes dans un texte littéraire.
there are a lot of aspects that I could have brought in, and there is a very positive aspect as regards the deaf community, because one of the things I really wanted to do was to bring sign language into literature.
Et pour l'aspect effectivement plus politiquement incorrect, on va dire, c'est l'idée que je voulais m'amuser avec l'idée qu'il y ait une espèce de hiérarchie dans le handicap, et comment, dans les communautés, parfois, il y a quelque chose qui est de l'ordre du... Je voulais pousser un curseur et montrer que les sourds se regardaient entre eux pour savoir s'ils étaient plus ou moins sourds, enfin, comme si...
And for the more politically incorrect aspect, perhaps, I wanted to play around with the idea that in the disability community there are often hierarchies, and so I wanted to push the bar a little bit to see kind of the people looking at each other, trying to size each other up as who are more or less deaf, than someone else.
And I have one question, if that's okay. I find myself explaining to people at moments, at least the way I perceive it, is I think this may be a book that's more for hearing people than for deaf people. And I wonder, did that happen to matter to how we feel about it? Or do you disagree?
C'est vrai que c'est ce que j'ai entendu, c'est que c'était un livre effectivement beaucoup plus pour les entendants, pour leur faire comprendre un certain nombre d'aspects, à la fois des malentendants, ceux qui sont dans un entre-deux-mondes, mais aussi des questions propres à la culture sourde.
So this is what I have also heard, is that this is a book for non-deaf people, helping them understand, aspects of the misunderstandings that can happen in that space and the lack of understanding, but also the way in which, what is the lived experience of deaf people.
Any other questions? Thank you, Heather. No, that's okay. We can do the one. Just don't want to cut anyone off. Nope. It's too good.
So we'll end shortly, but I think one of the great richnesses of this novel is the dimensionality that you give to the deaf community, to the world that Louise is inhabiting. It feels like a very charged and alive space that you've created on the page, and I feel grateful as a reader for it. One last question. So it started by saying that this is a book that doesn't get into the before very much, before the dilemma, and it doesn't go into very much into, it doesn't go into the aftermath at all. It stops before the procedure. And I'm curious about that choice, and I wonder if you ever envisioned giving us the after, an epilogue, or if it was always very clear in your mind that this is where it stops.
Tout au long du livre, il y a un herbier sonore, ce que j'ai appelé un herbier sonore, qui est que la narratrice archive les sons poétiquement avant qu'ils disparaissent.
So throughout the book, there is a sound herbarium where the narrator archives sounds before they disappear.
Et donc chaque son qu'elle archive, il y a une phrase poétique complètement absurde, mais qui sonne comme le son.
So for each sound, there's a poetic phrase, completely absurd, but that sounds like the sound.
Et il était clair pour moi que je voulais que le livre se termine sur un nouvel herbier qui mélangerait tous les mots qui avaient été jusque-là archivés tout au long du texte.
So it was clear for me that I wanted the novel to end on a new herbarium that was mixing all of the words that had been archived throughout the text.
Et c'est comme ça que, à la fin, à la toute fin, c'est l'apologue, c'est ces quelques phrases qui sont le nouvel herbier de la façon dont elle entendra peut-être après l'opération.
And so that's why the book ends on this new herbarium, which is the epilogue, the apology, which is perhaps the way that she will hear after the operation.
I'll read the last page. It's not a spoiler, but just to give you a sense of the new world. Muttering of drunk sobriquets, jawbone chewing the Pyrenees, ice cap left for dead, overtone song of green crocs, avalanche of cups and balls.
Springland image aid that whole set of distinct images come from a being of sounds that Louise has been able to pursue. The sound of St. Rose's good ooze, those could be combined in that binding scene. And it really brings me to something I wanted to ask. You got asked the same question a couple of minutes ago, so maybe you haven't been so ready to go, but if we had to commit the being which one is sound from many states that you would want to put into a being.
Quand on était à Albertine, il y a 2 jours,
When we were at Albertine bookstore in New York 2 days ago,
on nous a posé la question quel était le son que je retiendrais de New York.
so we were asked what is the sound that I would retain from New York, or that we would retain from New York.
Et j'ai parlé surtout de la sensation du métro.
And yeah, I spoke specifically of the sensation of the subway.
Parce qu'il n'y a pas de caoutchouc sur les roues du métro, je l'ai appris plus tard.
Because there's no rubber on the wheels of the subway, which I learned later.
Donc c'est souvent une affaire de sensation plus que de son.
So it's often more a matter of sensation than of sound.
Does Adèle have a Boston sound yet?
Il y a une sorte de petit vent sournois et étouffé.
There's a sort of small wind that's a bit sneaky and also stifled.
That's a good place to stop. Thank you very much to Jeffrey and to Adèle. Thank you so much for the wonderful interpretation. Thanks all for coming.